Everything you've been taught about civilization is incomplete. Not outdated, not debated, incomplete. Right now, in southeastern Turkey, there's a structure buried beneath the earth that challenges every timeline, every textbook, every assumption we've made about human history. We're told civilization began around 6,000 years ago, Sumeria, Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent. That's when humans supposedly figured out agriculture, built the first cities, invented writing. But beneath the Anatolian plains, archaeologists have uncovered something that changes the equation completely. A monumental complex, not a village, not a campsite, a planned structure with temples, astronomical alignments, and engineering that rivals some of the greatest achievements of the ancient world. And it dates to 11,600 years ago. When the Egyptians were building the pyramids, this place was already ancient. When Sumeria was inventing writing, this complex had been abandoned for 6,000 years. Let that settle in. This site was buried and forgotten before the oldest known civilizations even existed. Today, we're not just looking at ruins, we're looking at evidence that the story of civilization has chapters we've never read. And the people who built it, they disappear from the archaeological record with almost no trace. Their genetic lineage becomes untraceable. Their culture leaves no obvious descendants. They just fade. So here's the question. If an advanced culture can vanish so completely, what makes you think ours is permanent? The site is called Göbekli Tepe. In Turkish, it means potbelly hill, unremarkable name for one of the most important discoveries in archaeology. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating in 1995, what he found contradicted nearly everything the academic community believed about the Neolithic period. Massive limestone pillars, T-shaped, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in circular formations, carved with detailed reliefs of animals, lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures, snakes, species that don't naturally congregate, species that suggest symbolic thinking. Look at these carvings. They're not primitive scratches, they're three-dimensional reliefs. Some pillars have human arms carved along their sides, hands folded across the belly, as if the stones themselves represent beings, guardians, observers. And they didn't just carve them on site, they quarried and transported them. The quarry is half a kilometer away, uphill. These people who, according to standard chronology, didn't have the wheel, didn't have metal tools, didn't even have pottery yet, somehow moved 20-ton blocks across rugged terrain and erected them with precision. Even modern engineers debate how this was achieved with Stone Age tools. The pillars are set into perfectly carved bedrock sockets. The weight distribution is exact. These structures have stood for over 11 millennia without collapsing, without the benefit of modern concrete, steel reinforcement, or mortar. Compare this to later temples. Even Bronze Age structures show more weathering, more structural compromise. But it gets more intriguing. The site shows deliberate astronomical orientation. Researchers have documented alignments between the pillars and specific celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, star positions. Whoever designed Göbekli Tepe understood celestial mechanics with accuracy that appears far beyond what we'd expect for mobile hunter-gatherers, because that's the official designation, hunter-gatherers. Not sedentary farmers, not urbanized populations, mobile groups that followed game and foraged for wild plants. Yet they organized this. A site covering 22 acres, at least 20 circular stone enclosures identified through ground-penetrating radar, only a fraction excavated so far. This required coordinated labor of hundreds, possibly thousands of individuals over multiple generations. You don't mobilize that level of effort just for survival. You do it for shared belief, for meaning, for culture, for civilization. But according to the established timeline, civilization didn't exist yet. So who were they? Recent genetic analysis of ancient remains from the region reveals something unexpected. The people associated with Göbekli Tepe don't show clear genetic continuity we can currently trace to later populations in the area. They represent what researchers call a ghost population. They appear in the archaeological record around 12,000 years ago. They build these monumental complexes, and then their distinct genetic signature diminishes or disappears from later samples. No straightforward descendants, no obvious biological legacy in modern regional populations. They were either absorbed beyond recognition, displaced, or something interrupted their lineage. And here's what makes it more compelling. Around the same period Göbekli Tepe was active, similar sites emerge across the region: Nevali Chori, Karahan Tepe, Cyborch, all featuring the same T-shaped megalithic pillars, all showing sophisticated stonework. This isn't an isolated phenomenon, it's a widespread cultural signature spreading across Anatolia during a period when such complexity supposedly didn't exist. But then, around 10,000 years ago, something shifts. The sites are abandoned. More than that, they're deliberately buried, filled systematically with thousands of tons of debris and soil. This wasn't natural erosion. This wasn't gradual neglect. Someone made a choice to cover them. And the people who built them largely vanish from the record. No extensive written language, no clear successor cultures claiming them as ancestors, no oral traditions that survived. Just silence, buried beneath centuries of earth.
So why isn't this common knowledge? Why isn't Göbekli Tepe the centerpiece of every discussion about human origins? Because it disrupts the model. The narrative we've been taught about human development is linear, predictable, comfortable. Humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers. Then we discovered agriculture. Agriculture created food surplus. Surplus enabled permanent settlements. Settlements evolved into cities. Cities developed writing, organized religion, complex art. Step by step, cause and effect, gradual progression. Göbekli Tepe challenges that sequence. Extensive surveys around the site show limited evidence of domesticated crops during its active period. No irrigation infrastructure, no grain storage facilities typical of agricultural communities. The people who built this monumental religious complex appear to have done so before transitioning to full-scale agriculture. That's the reverse of what the model predicts. According to traditional theory, organized religion emerges after civilization. You need agricultural surplus to support a priest class, to free up labor for temple construction, to develop complex mythology. But Göbekli Tepe suggests a different sequence. What if the drive to gather for ritual purposes, the need for shared sacred space, was itself a catalyst for developing agriculture? What if belief and ritual motivated the transition to settled life, rather than being a byproduct of it? That's not just academically interesting, it's a fundamental reframing of what drives human social development. And if that reframing is accurate, it means our understanding of cultural evolution has been incomplete. But there's another layer, a more immediate question. Why bury it? You don't abandon a site of this scale casually. You don't systematically fill in 20 acres of sacred architecture with rubble without reason. Something changed. Some researchers point to climate catastrophe. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth's climate underwent rapid, severe disruption, the Younger Dryas period. Temperatures dropped dramatically, ice sheets re-advanced, ecosystems collapsed across multiple continents.
The cause remains debated. Some evidence suggests extraterrestrial impact, other data points to volcanic activity or thermohaline circulation changes in the oceans. But the consequences are documented: a global environmental crisis that devastated megafauna populations and forced human adaptation on a massive scale. And right during this tumultuous period, Göbekli Tepe was being constructed. Some researchers propose the site represents a response to catastrophe, an attempt to make sense of a destabilizing world through ritual and monument. The iconography supports this interpretation: vultures, carrion birds associated with death, scorpions with raised stingers, coiled snakes, all symbols carrying threat, danger, mortality. And at the center, those T-shaped pillars with carved arms standing like sentinels. Notice the posture of the pillars, arms positioned as if watching, waiting. Watching for what? At a nearby site, researchers have identified a pillar covered with specific animal symbols that some interpret as a date marker, potentially commemorating a celestial event around 10,950 BCE, coinciding with proposed impact evidence. If accurate, it suggests the builders were creating a permanent record, a warning encoded in stone for whoever came after. But here's where it becomes puzzling. After the Younger Dryas ended around 9600 BCE, climate stabilized, agricultural practices expanded, human populations grew. And that's approximately when Göbekli Tepe was systematically buried. Not destroyed in violence, not abandoned to decay, buried, carefully, methodically, as if being intentionally preserved or hidden. Why would a culture inter its most significant sacred site during a period of relative stability and growth? One theory, ritual closure. Perhaps the community believed the site had fulfilled its purpose, that the powers or entities it was built to honor needed to be ceremonially sealed away for a new era to begin. Or perhaps new populations arrived. There's limited evidence of conflict at Göbekli Tepe itself, but demographic shifts don't always leave obvious archaeological signatures. If incoming groups with different belief systems settled the region, they may have required the old sacred sites to be decommissioned. And then there's the genetic question. If the people most directly associated with Göbekli Tepe don't show clear continuity in later regional populations, what happened? Integration is possible, absorbed into incoming agricultural communities. But the degree of genetic discontinuity suggests something more significant: displacement, population replacement, possibly disease, environmental pressure, or conflict that prevented biological continuity. It's happened throughout human history. Neanderthal populations were largely replaced by anatomically modern humans. Denisovans left genetic traces, but no surviving populations. Entire human lineages have disappeared. Could the same pattern have affected the builders of Göbekli Tepe? And if so, what knowledge disappeared with them? Up to this point, Göbekli Tepe already challenges our timeline of civilization. But what comes next is where the story stops being just academically interesting and starts raising uncomfortable questions about what we've lost. Because the sites weren't isolated experiments, they were part of something larger. And the pattern they reveal appears across the ancient world in ways we're only beginning to understand.
Here's what the evidence shows. 11,600 years ago, a culture with advanced understanding of astronomy, engineering, and symbolic art built monumental complexes that required coordinated labor on a massive scale. And then, that culture's clear archaeological signature diminishes dramatically. But they weren't alone in building. In the past 2 decades, archaeologists have identified dozens of related structures across Turkey, the Levant, and into the Caucasus Mountains. Karahan Tepe, potentially larger than Gobekli Tepe,
features underground chambers and pillars carved directly from bedrock, and even more labor-intensive technique. Saybirch contains some of the oldest known high-relief carvings of human figures, full-bodied representations showing sophisticated artistic skill. Bonchuklu Tarla, another significant complex with the distinctive T-shaped pillars and clear ritual architecture. These aren't isolated anomalies, they represent a shared architectural tradition, a widespread cultural pattern. And we've only excavated a fraction. Ground-penetrating radar surveys indicate that more than 90% of Göbekli Tepe remains buried. The enclosures we've uncovered are just the accessible beginning. What's still underground? What additional knowledge might be encoded in structures we haven't yet reached? Some researchers propose that the ancient world was more interconnected than conventional models suggest, that there were networks of trade, communication, and shared knowledge long before the Bronze Age civilizations we're familiar with. The parallels are intriguing. Megalithic stone circles in Britain, the temples of Malta with their precise stonework, early stepped platforms in Mesopotamia. Different continents, different cultures separated by thousands of miles and sometimes thousands of years, but recurring themes: monumental stone construction, astronomical alignments, architecture designed for permanence. These sites weren't part of a single global civilization, but they reflect recurring solutions to the same human problem: how to preserve meaning across time. Why this pattern? Perhaps these separate cultures independently arrived at the same conclusion. Knowledge is fragile unless you encode it in something that can survive catastrophe. Build in stone, align to the eternal movements of celestial bodies, create structures that can outlast floods, earthquakes, invasions, and the erosion of time. And they were proven correct, because we did forget. For over 11,000 years, Göbekli Tepe remained hidden, silent, buried by deliberate human action, or by time, or by environmental processes. And when excavation finally began in the 1990s, the archaeological community struggled to integrate it into existing frameworks because it contradicts the narrative of simple linear progress, the idea that each generation is automatically more advanced than the last, that we represent the pinnacle of human capability. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that assessment is incomplete. It proves that sophisticated knowledge can emerge, flourish, and then be lost, that civilizations rise and fall, that the people we categorize as primitive may have understood principles we've had to rediscover. And that reality is uncomfortable. Because if their civilization could collapse, if their knowledge could be lost, if their genetic lineage could fade from the record, the same processes could affect us. Look at the present pattern. Climate disruption, the warming rather than cooling, the destabilization is comparable. Political fragmentation, economic volatility, pandemic vulnerability, resource competition. The forces that challenged the builders of Göbekli Tepe haven't disappeared, they've just changed form. The Younger Dryas was a rapid climate shift that forced massive human adaptation. We're experiencing our own accelerated climate transformation: rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, ecosystem stress. Different direction, potentially similar consequences: population displacement, agricultural disruption, systemic instability. And like the people of Göbekli Tepe, we're building monuments, not temples to unknown gods, skyscrapers, server farms, satellites. But will they communicate cross millennia? Will future archaeologists 11,000 years from now uncover our cities and understand what we valued, what we believed, what we knew? Or will we be another mysterious ghost population, another lost culture buried beneath layers of sediment and time? We can't know with certainty, but Göbekli Tepe offers a template. The builders understood impermanence. They knew their world was unstable. So they encoded their most important knowledge in the most durable medium available: stone, aligned to the stars, built to outlast everything. And the message they left is simple. We existed. We built this. We understood something worth preserving. That's what survives the collapse. Not the people themselves, not necessarily their DNA, not even their cultural continuity, but the structures, the carvings, the questions they force us to ask. 11,000 years later, we're standing in what remains of their world, attempting to decode their intentions, which means, in a fundamental way, they succeeded. They're not completely forgotten. They're not entirely erased. They persist in the mysteries they've left behind, in our ongoing attempts to understand. And perhaps that's the true function of monumental architecture. Not to house the living, not even to honor the dead, but to communicate with the unimaginably distant future. To send a message across time to people who won't share your language, your culture, your worldview. To say, this mattered. We were here. Remember. But critical questions remain. What do the T-shaped pillars actually represent? Some researchers interpret them as stylized human forms. Others propose their representations of deities. Some suggest astronomical markers. No consensus exists. Why the specific animal iconography? The creatures carved into the pillars appear in combinations that don't reflect natural relationships. They seem chosen for symbolic significance we can't fully decode. Are they clan totems? Seasonal markers? Mythological narratives? We're still interpreting. And the most significant question, where did the knowledge originate? Did the builders of Gobekli Tepe develop these techniques independently, or did they inherit them from an even earlier tradition we haven't yet discovered? The sophistication appears relatively suddenly in the archaeological record, limited evidence of gradual development leading up to it, which suggests either rapid innovation or knowledge transmission from a source we haven't identified. If rapid innovation, it means human cognitive capability for complex abstract thinking emerged earlier than we've assumed. If knowledge transmission, it means there are older layers to this story, cultures that predate even Gobekli Tepe. And if that's the case, how far back does it go? Because history isn't actually linear, it's cyclical. Cultures emerge, they develop technologies, they build cities, they create art, philosophy, complex social structures, and then disruption occurs: environmental catastrophe, disease, warfare, economic collapse, and much of what was built gets buried, forgotten, lost. We know this has happened with specific innovations. The Romans had concrete formulations we couldn't replicate for over 1,000 years. The exact composition of Damascus steel was lost. Manufacturing techniques for Damascus steel disappeared. And if that pattern holds for individual technologies, could it hold for entire knowledge systems? Gobekli Tepe suggests the answer might be yes.
Which brings us to the practical question: what are we doing to ensure our knowledge survives? We've digitized vast amounts of information, billions of documents stored on servers worldwide. But digital storage is fragile. Servers fail, formats become obsolete, companies go bankrupt, political systems collapse. How much of our accumulated knowledge would survive a significant civilization-level disruption? If global infrastructure failed for even a decade, how much digital information would become irretrievable? Some organizations recognize this vulnerability. The Global Seed Vault in Svalbard stores genetic material in permafrost. The Long Now Foundation is creating a mechanical clock designed to function for 10,000 years. Various projects are etching data onto materials designed for extreme longevity. But these are exceptions.
The vast majority of human knowledge currently exists in formats that require continuous technological infrastructure to access, formats that wouldn't survive what Gobekli Tepe survived. The builders of those ancient sites encoded their most important information in stone, specifically because stone endures. It doesn't require electricity. It doesn't need compatible software. It doesn't depend on political stability or economic systems. It just persists for 11,000 years, outlasting empires, languages, religions, entire civilizations. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Are we actually less capable of preserving knowledge than our Neolithic ancestors? We have more information, more sophisticated understanding, but do we have more durable storage? If you wanted to send a message that would definitely be readable 11,000 years from now, what medium would you choose? Probably not a hard drive, not a book, not even most metals which corrode. You'd probably choose stone, just like they did, which suggests they understood something about permanence that we're still grappling with. So what was the message they were trying to preserve? We may never know completely. The symbolic system carved into Göbekli Tepe's pillars likely represented concepts specific to their worldview, their cosmology, their understanding of existence. Concepts we can only approximate from archaeological context. But the meta-message, the message about messaging, is clear. What matters survives only if you build it to survive. Memories fade, stories change with each telling, even stone eventually erodes. But the act of building something meant to outlast you, that's the statement. It says, this is important enough to preserve beyond my lifetime, beyond my culture's lifetime, beyond anything I can personally imagine. And that impulse to create permanence in an impermanent world might be the most fundamentally human characteristic there is. We're the species that builds monuments, not for practical shelter, not for immediate survival, but to say, we were here. This meant something. Remember us. And 11,000 years later, standing in the excavated ruins of Gobekli Tepe, we do remember. We don't remember their names. We don't remember their language. We can't reconstruct their daily lives with certainty. But we remember that they mattered, that they built something extraordinary, that they were us, just separated by time. The secrets of our past are the only map we have for navigating the future. Gobekli Tepe shows us that complex cultures can emerge earlier than we expect, that knowledge can be lost completely, that entire populations can fade from the genetic record. But it also shows us that the human drive to create, to preserve, to communicate across time, that impulse transcends any individual culture. It's deeper than agriculture, older than cities, more fundamental than writing. It's the need to build meaning that outlasts individual mortality. And right now, we face similar choices to the ones the builders of Gobekli Tepe faced. We're experiencing environmental disruption, social instability, rapid technological change. We can preserve what we've learned, encode it in durable forms, create redundancy so knowledge survives even if systems fail. Or we can assume continuity, trust that digital infrastructure will persist indefinitely, believe our civilization is immune to the catastrophic knowledge loss that has happened repeatedly throughout human history. But the stones at Gobekli Tepe tell us a different story. They tell us that nothing is guaranteed, that continuity requires intentional effort, that knowledge preservation is a choice, not an automatic outcome. And they remind us that we're part of a much longer story than we usually acknowledge, a story that stretches back at least 11,600 years, probably further. A story of cultures rising and falling, knowledge being discovered, lost and rediscovered. a story that isn't finished. Because the question Göbekli Tepe poses isn't just about the past, it's about what we build next, what we choose to preserve, what message we encode for whoever comes after. The past isn't dead, it's just buried, and we're only beginning to uncover it. Because those cities and temples, they weren't the only thing this ghost culture left behind. Next week, we examine the DNA evidence of the other human lineages that walked this planet alongside us and the traces they left in our own genes. Subscribe to Chronopedia to keep digging. The stones are waiting, and they have more to tell us.